Hello, everybody, and welcome to WordCast number 79. Okay, I almost said 78 again, so that could have been bad. But
Darn, I
Ethan
wish you would
here.
have messed up this time.
I know. It's been a good streak of me not messing it up, which is kind of rare. So it's gonna happen at some point. I'm probably gonna say like 70, 80 or something next time. But yeah,
No, you'll
quite a
say 3080.
3080, yes, 3080, or 3090, or I don't know. So quite a bit of interesting news this week. We're going to be talking about some of the RTX 30 series rumors and leaks, as well as we know, Epic is going up against Google and Apple, which is kind of a big deal. And then quite a bit of other stuff, including Mozilla laying people off and some Truenas, FreeNAS updates and stuff like that. So lots of good news this week.
Yeah, and we're gonna start off. So, just a few days ago, NVIDIA had started teasing an event. They did this whole thing of 21 days until 21 years was like the start of their teaser.
Yeah,
And that was meant to signify 21 years since the GeForce 256.
I believe so. Yeah. I
Which
don't know. It
was
was
a
before
very,
we were into
very
computers.
Yeah. That was a very, very significant GPU in that it was essentially the first modern GPU.
Yeah.
It was the first thing structured in the way GPUs are pretty much now, and so they're hyping up like this as being the biggest deal announcement or the biggest I guess innovation in GPUs or year-over-year innovation at least since then,
Which is a
which is
huge
pretty
claim.
significant.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens, but that's what they're
Yeah.
claiming.
NVIDIA sometimes does like to overhype things.
Yeah. Now we'll get into how I think that's feasible in a second when we talk about the actual hardware.
Okay.
But first, I just want to talk about how. So the announcement is coming September 1st.
Yeah. So we'll all
So
keep our eyes open for that. And I September 1st is a Tuesday, so I'll probably be making a dedicated video on that, and then we'll also talk about it in the podcast the following week.
yeah, I'm disappointed that it's not on a Monday. Like I get why these events are never on Mondays because they want to show up, make sure everything is prepared the day beforehand.
Yeah.
But I don't work Mondays,
Right. Yeah.
so
Tuesday
like
works for me though because I don't work my second job, so I'll have time at home to compile and do a video.
yeah,
Talking head
yeah.
probably right here.
As far as actual hardware that we're expecting, though, we've gotten some leaks and some confirmations on things. The first thing, probably the biggest thing, is
Micron
that
oopsied.
yeah, Micron essentially confirmed a couple things about the 3090.
Yeah.
So they confirmed the speed. Now, the speed was the main thing they're advertising. So this is the thing that I think is most likely like 100% correct. Whereas I do think that it's possible that the VRAM that they're claiming could be wrong in that it's not essential to what they are advertising in the same way. But what they were talking about was their GDDR6X VRAM. And this is supposed to be between 19 and 21 gigabits per second.
Yeah, which is pretty significant.
Yeah. For reference, GDDR6 is like 14 to 16.
Yeah.
So we're looking at like a
pretty significant
almost
jump.
third increase, if not more.
Yeah, which is pretty awesome. I mean, the 12 gigs of VRAM is, about what we expected in terms of the amount, but that speed is pretty impressive, and that could help potentially even with things like SLI and other kind of more, unique.
Well, it's not
setups.
SLI anymore.
Yes, right, yeah, it's NVLink, but the faster memory can help with that sort of thing, as well as help with multi-GPU setups for rendering and stuff, not just for gaming, so
yeah.
It's pretty
and
cool
I wonder how helpful that is for ray tracing.
Yeah, that's something that...
Because... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think ray tracing is definitely something that's going to have a pretty drastic benefit from it. So ray tracing is bandwidth intensive. We do know that. Obviously, it's processing intensive too, but if they're able to get the processing power of the tensor cores and stuff up to be able to do even better processing and get you better frame rates and stuff of ray tracing, I think the higher VRAM speed is going to be even more important at that point. So it could in some ways be a hint or an indication of a significant jump in ray tracing performance, which is exactly what we'd expect. But
Yeah, because supposedly what we're going to see is both a very, very significant increase in ray tracing performance per RT core,
yeah,
as well as a big increase in RT cores.
yeah,
And
yep,
so if we're getting all of that and then the faster memory bandwidth, I think that's the point they're going to make as far as biggest increase since 1999 in performance.
yeah,
Is we're going to go from ray tracing being, if this is all true, a realistically fairly minor thing used for uh, a small number of features within a game,
uh-huh,
to being a bit wider scale. Like if we can make it so that any game that wants to use ray traced global illumination can do that, and then still also do good ray traced reflections, for example, turning on a couple of features at a time
yeah, yeah.
instead of being limited to just like lower res ray traced reflections,
It's a big deal.
or or GI, or one of just a number of different things.
Hmm.
Um, and if we can achieve that while increasing frame rate this gen instead of having it lower, like obviously ray tracing will be lower than no ray tracing,
Well, right, right, but
but
just like having,
yeah, if the
yeah,
GPU itself can be so much better overall, and the ray tracing can be so much less of a performance hit, that we can see an increase in frame rates if you go from like a 2080 with no ray tracing to a 3080 with ray tracing and play at higher frames. That's what I think their
yeah,
goal in advertising is going to be, is that, hey, we can do this. That's how big of an increase it would be.
yeah, yeah, and I think that would warrant them, saying that this is one of the biggest leaps that they've had and stuff. And it's the same thing where like I feel like Nvidia when they're pushing for new GPUs, it's not uncommon for them to push something as the first real-time ray tracing or the first 4K gaming card and kind of be a year off, like, right? So like the 980 Ti was the first 4K gaming card when they talked about it,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the Titan that it was based on. And it was like, 1080 Ti is actually really good for 4K. 980 Ti was like, I didn't really consider that a 4K card myself. And I think we're going to see a similar kind of jump here, where a lot of people didn't consider the 2000 series being that great for ray tracing, and I think we're going to see a jump where now it's like people that don't care as much about ray tracing but are still have an interest in it are going to want to shell out the money for it.
Yeah, and like personally for me, I considered the 20 series more of like ray tracing development cards. And I think
Yeah,
even on WordCast we had talked about how I'm like, this is laying the groundwork for the better cards. It takes a lot of time to learn how to, you know, develop an entirely new rendering technique.
yeah,
Because this
yeah.
is not just a lighting effect in a game. This is actually changing how things are rendered.
Right, right, exactly. So I think it was kind of an early adopter series, but the thing that was, obviously they were expensive, but there was also, without ray tracing, the performance increase was pretty drastic with the
Yeah.
2000 series over the 10,000 series, and that was where some people had a heavier interest in it. You know,
1000 series, not 10,000.
yeah, sorry. I
We're
personally
not there yet.
still
We're still 7 years away from that, Ethan.
something along those lines, right? But I'm still running 1080 Ti's in my system.
Mhm.
I didn't feel like the 2000 series was big enough of a jump, but I do have a 2060 to play with, ray tracing too. So I think that's exactly right. I think it was kind of a development card and a test card, people that wanted to see what this could be like, rather than people that like actually were expecting to use it constantly.
Yeah. Well, and then the other nice thing is that, so with consoles getting ray tracing, obviously the ray tracing effects will be much less significant because they're very weak in the ray tracing hardware side.
Yeah, yeah,
What we're going to see is that more and more developers will have a better understanding of how to develop ray tracing and how to implement it in their engines and in their games.
yeah. That's a good
And
point.
then from there, that's where PC can come in and be the unique thing and be the, like, instead of just a couple of ray tracing effects, we can be ray tracing is widespread.
Yeah, and like ray tracing VR and other stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And like this will be how it contrasts with consoles, which realistically consoles are jumping ahead for the next few years because of IO.
yeah.
And
Hmm.
so this is going to be the thing, is that it's, without this, consoles would straight up be ahead in some regards as far as how games are developed, because there's so many things that you can't do when you have to develop for hard drive.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is a very, very hard limit on things. And so without a big jump in ray tracing, we would have seen, obviously like resolution is going to be better on a 3080 Ti or a 3090 than what a console can put out anyway.
Yeah.
But resolution isn't everything.
No, no, it's
Um,
not. And I mean, a lot of people will play at lower res with like better ray tracing or something like that.
yeah. And so being able to have them rather than just constantly leapfrogging one another,
Yeah.
or not constantly because this gen they didn't really do that, but that's traditionally what's happened with consoles is they've jumped ahead for a few years
Mm-hmm.
because of some new innovation, and then PC has not just surpassed but skyrocketed ahead,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
then consoles launched just barely above,
Well, and a
and
lot of
then
times with PC, it's like if you can spend the money at the same time, then you can get something that's equivalent in a lot of ways.
yeah, whereas where this looking at this generation, you couldn't do that because the fact of the matter is that no matter how much money you spend on your PC, that doesn't change the fact that there's not going to be games made for a while that are made just for the SSD. Whereas
Yeah,
PlayStation 5 will have exclusive games made just for that.
a
And
lot
then in
of them.
addition to that, PlayStation 5 will have third party games get optimized for that much sooner than PC
Mm-hmm.
because PC, until you make the commitment to drop hard drives, like
Yeah,
what are you going to have an SSD download on Steam and a hard drive download on Steam? Like that might work for certain types of games where the user base would be more savvy.
yeah, but it has to become a point where it's automated, where if they're going to start doing that on PC, like things like Steam and other game platforms are going to have to recognize the type of drive that you're using and determine
Mm-hmm.
if that drive is good enough for you to be able to purchase the game. So like they shouldn't like they would have to automate it in a way where you can't just go to steampowered.com and purchase the game there. You have to purchase it with the client on a machine that's powerful enough and has the SSD to
I
do
mean, no,
that,
they don't. I don't think they have to do that because like PC games have had min spec requirements for years.
Okay, this is true, but I mean, I think a
There are
hard drive
games
is
now.
or SSD as a min spec is one
That's
that's
what the refund policy is for, though. In fact, this would be the best
true.
example of the refund policy: is you start downloading the game, or you buy the game, and then before you can even download it, once you get onto your client, or once you try to initiate the download from the app,
Yeah.
it says, "Oh, you can't install this because you have an SSD." But that's for once we reach that point. I'm talking about like
Hmm.
I doubt we're going to see, especially for PC, like I doubt we're ever going to see a point where developers are making an SSD optimized and a non SSD optimized game. Or
No, right, right,
some will.
yeah.
Not very many will release both. But if
They're
you're
gonna go all
releasing,
the way there if they're gonna do it. Yeah,
yeah, if you're releasing cross-platform or cross-generation games, then it
yeah,
makes sense to do in some regards because like you're already doing it.
right.
If you optimize for the PS5 and the Xbox One's SSD, and you optimize for the PS4 and the Xbox One's hard drive, then you've already done that work.
Yeah, that's true.
Um, but I think it'll be a lot longer until we see PC games made just for SSDs outside of like, I mean, Star Citizen is kind of now,
Yeah,
but also Star Citizen isn't really a game anymore yet.
I mean, yeah, it's still unplayable in a lot of ways too.
Yeah. And so like it's nice that rather than console just jumping ahead for a while, we're seeing them just kind of take different paths.
Yeah, they're divulging
Is
a
more
bit.
so I guess
Yeah,
the point I wanted to get at. And like eventually, I'm sure that the mid-generation refresh of these consoles will have better ray tracing hardware, and I'm sure that in a few years PCs will have SSD specific titles,
yeah,
and they'll kind of converge again, and just at different levels. But it's nice that it's not just one leapfrogging the other now.
yeah, yeah. There's some uniqueness here this time
Mm-hmm.
around. Yeah, yeah, definitely, and it's an exciting time. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
just excited to see what this is going to be like. Like this next gen stuff, especially with some of these rumored clock speeds and stuff coming out of the 3000 series are really impressive.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. So you want to go ahead with the 3080?
yeah, yeah. So there's some leaks and rumors, which of course, like take it with somewhat of a grain of salt, but it's leaked from videocards.com where they usually do a pretty good job with their leaks. So it looks like the 3080 Ti might have up to a 2.1 gigahertz max clock, which would be the boost clock, of course, and 10 gigs of VRAM. So that's already quite a bit of VRAM for what is not the top end card from the series. 10
Mm-hmm.
gigs is a pretty big jump, even over the 8 gigs that we get. And then 2.1 gigahertz would be really impressive. You know, we're seeing higher and higher clocks on GPUs, and you know, that is 2.1 gigahertz is a pretty big leap, even over the 2080 Ti, I believe. Let me double check this really quick. But it's we're seeing clock speed increases, and again, like, it'll probably overclock further than that. You know, we can't say off the top of our heads how good the overclocking is really going to be. But yeah, like, if you look at the boost clock of the 2080 Ti is 1635 megahertz. Now, there have been some people that have gotten that, and I think even 2080s to the 2 gigahertz realm, but that's like extreme overclocking. This is out of the box. So
Yeah.
pretty impressive. So
Yeah, and this is pretty likely to be accurate too when you look at how they got the information on this one. So
yeah.
the recent driver, there was like a recent driver update, I think, through Microsoft's end, not through Nvidia's,
Uh-huh.
that had leaked a device ID of 2206, which was confirmed by outside sources to video cards to be the 3080.
Okay.
And a device ID of 2206 is what showed up on user benchmark with these
Yeah.
numbers.
So it's pretty substantiated at that point.
Yeah, it's very likely that at least there is a device being tested with these specs, whether or not that's what launches.
Yeah, like, we may see it have, you know, a little bit lower clocks when it launches, but they're at least
Yeah.
attempting to push to
Yeah,
this
depending on
range.
yields, they might not be able to hit that for all of them, or who knows. Maybe this is a downsampled version of the card. I doubt it, but
Right, yeah. Like, maybe there's something here that's making it appear better than it could be, but I don't know. It's interesting. You know, I'm really excited for this 3000 series launch. I've been waiting a long time for it. I've been on the 1000, not 10,000 series for a long time. And I'm hoping that this is a big enough jump that it's worth the upgrade. And of course, I'm going to wait to see what AMD has going on this year as well, because AMD, we haven't had as many rumors, but AMD is looking potentially really promising this time around.
yeah, I mean, we had a lot of rumors before. It just seems like because they're not as close to launch, we're not seeing as much of this side of things.
Yeah.
Because, like, from what I remember before, what we saw was that their top end card was expected to be quite a bit above the 2080 Ti, but I don't want to say quite a bit below, like essentially placed somewhere in the middle of the 2080 Ti and the new 3080, 3090. Who knows where
Yeah, whatever
exactly
they
that
call it.
slotted in with that card. But it was going
Yeah.
to be below some of the NVIDIA cards, but above the 2080 Ti.
Yeah. Now, the big thing is, though, AMD sometimes tends to be somebody that includes some more workstation type features and a little bit less limitations on the driver end for workstation work. And so that's why I'm particularly interested in waiting for it to see what happens. Because even if the gaming performance and the ray tracing performance isn't as good, you know, if it's like I can spend, you know, let's say $800 on a card, or $1,000 that has like 24 gigs of VRAM, instead of having to spend like 2,500 on whatever the next Titan is that has 24 gigs of VRAM. Like,
Yeah.
that could potentially be more useful to me, even if it's 15% slower in game, but still, you know, a good 30% leap over like my 1080 Ti.
Yeah.
So that's why and you know, that's been something that has been true even for a while, is like AMD has been behind on the GPU front for a while, but they have had advantages in the department of workstation type tasks. VRAM, driver stability was better for a while. It seems like that's kind of flipped a little bit again, but you know, so it's being closer in performance is going to make those other things matter even more in some ways, right? Because it's like, oh, you can get more VRAM, and you are, you know, and potentially like more stable drivers, just as an example, and it's like that's costing you less money, and you're only getting slightly lower performance. And in many cases, in some areas, you'll get actually better performance in workstation specific things like SolidWorks or even video rendering and stuff like that. So I'm excited to see the direction that we go with GPUs this time around, but I do fully expect the top end NVIDIA part, 3090 or whatever it is, excluding the Titan, just the top end of the 3000 series to beat whatever AMD is putting out.
Yeah.
That wouldn't
And
be surprising.
I'm going to be really interested to see what the ray tracing performance is, because we know it's going to have RT
Yeah.
hardware.
Right.
Like, that
Yeah.
is confirmed at this point.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's going to be easier, I feel like, or it's not necessarily easier to develop for, but it's going to be, developers will be more familiar with RDNA 2 ray tracing
Yes.
hardware because of consoles.
Yep.
And so it gives them an advantage in some regards, despite very likely being worse ray tracing hardware. Like I'd be very
Yeah.
shocked if they came all that close to NVIDIA's, because NVIDIA is not on a first gen, they're on a second. And even
Yeah.
NVIDIA's first gen was something that they had worked on for a very significant amount of time.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, seeing games like Minecraft fully ray traced, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
those are going to be really playable on the 3000 series, I feel like. Um, and like that's an example where those might still struggle on AMD hardware when it's ray traced
Yeah,
GI, you know?
it depends on how much, I guess, how much they can scale up, because we know that both the Xbox and the PlayStation don't have a ton of RT cores or whatever
Yeah.
their version of that is.
Yeah.
We know that they're not meant to be like, insane amounts of ray tracing, but they will do like ray traced reflections or ray traced GI or whatever, depending on the game.
Right.
Um, and my guess is very little ray traced GI. With what we've seen from Unreal Engine 5, that doesn't seem as necessary. It seems like there's some new GI methods that are in the pipeline for developers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so it's like I wonder how much better the consumer GPUs are going to be compared to the console GPUs
No, that's a good
for
point.
ray
Yeah.
tracing.
It's going to be interesting to see what that's like. And one of the things that I'm, hoping and kind of I'm speculating because I'm hoping is that the 3000 series we see a very significant jump in the ray tracing performance of the lower end parts as well. I would love
Oh
to
yeah,
see like a 3060, being capable of ray tracing, not necessarily overall game performance, but ray tracing on the level of like a 2080 or 2080 Ti, right? So that we get, like you can actually play these games that have ray tracing, because it felt like with like the
from
2060, like the games that I've tested on the 2060 with ray tracing on, they're beautiful, but they're like barely playable.
so from my understanding, it might actually be more of a jump than that.
Okay. Okay.
Supposedly, we're looking at a 3 to 4x ray tracing improvement,
Okay, that would be amazing. Yeah, because that's
because we're
that's
looking at the improvement both in number of RT cores and the improvement in performance per core.
yeah. Okay, so that would be I guess that was where I feel like the 2000 series was lacking, is if you really wanted to use ray tracing, not just to test it, but to actually play with it, like you kind of had to get a 2080 or even more like a 2080 Ti, like a 2060, a
2070
2070.
Ti could do it pretty well.
Yeah, the
Even a 2070
2070,
was okay.
they were okay, but I mean, like there was, you had to turn down a lot of other stuff to get a more playable frame rate, and like the 2060 was, almost useless.
Yeah.
I mean, I've tested that one personally, like, but like the 2080 Max Q, for example, in my Alienware laptop, like I've been able to actually do pretty decent ray tracing on some games with that. It's been, fairly impressive. So, this is going to be that realm where it's like it's really properly capable though. So I'm pretty excited for
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah.
But for me personally and the type of work I do, things like VRAM might be more important in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so I may not even go NVIDIA this time around. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the really weird design that we're seeing from the card, like from the 3080 cards,
Yeah.
is likely coming from all of the work they're doing on RT, because they are apparently doing like an entire coprocessor for ray tracing.
Rather than being on the same die, it's going to be like a separate die. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and that's why there's fans on both sides. Is that they're
Oh.
the actual coprocessor for the ray tracing is actually on the other side.
Okay. I had missed that part then. I'd missed that rumor
Yeah,
somehow.
look up if you want to look at it, look up traversal coprocessors, I think what it was called.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And there was some stuff about that a while, or I don't want to say a while ago. It was like a week or two ago.
Right. Right. But like, yeah. Okay. I see. Interesting. That could be really cool, actually. Okay, that would make a lot of sense as to why it has the fans on both sides, because it is a weird design. Though, if that's the case, that's going to make water cooling blocks a little more challenging. We're going to have
Yep.
to see like sandwich water cooling blocks where you like.
It might make for some real cool designs, though.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what they could do is still have like essentially one block, but just parts that you lift them apart a little bit and then slot the card in and then sandwiches back down and bolt the other sides down or something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see what all this is like, because I mean, end of this year is the big upgrade to this guy over here. The big GPU and water cooling and storage upgrades that I'm planning, and so this is exciting. I hope we
Yeah.
see good stuff.
Yeah, like my guess is that the end goal is that the ray tracing hardware itself is good enough that turning ray tracing on does not represent a performance hit for everything else because the ray tracing hardware does all the work.
Yeah, yeah. So then at that point, that's actually a major benefit because that is one of the things that we've obviously seen with the 20 series, where you see this dip in regular
Yeah.
performance when you turn on the ray tracing.
And
So.
I should say with ray tracing on, I mean like to the settings optimized for that card. Obviously, some settings
Right,
will
yeah.
hurt any card, but
Well, and I mean, being a coprocessor like that, right? Like what's the slowest link, right? You know, like if the coprocessor can only handle the ray tracing at 30 frames a second, like, and that's what you're going to be running at is 30 frames a second, you know. So
well, I guess it depends on what you're trying to ray trace too. I mean, that would be a problem for GI, and that would be a problem for
mhm.
reflections in competitive games. But slower frame rate,
The
ray
rays could
trace
be behind the
reflections.
rest of the
Yeah,
game, yeah. And we could see some blend of rasterization and ray tracing. You could potentially even see, like, this is just speculation. It would depend on how hard this is to do, and you'd probably know better than me. But like having something that's rasterized at high frame rate until the ray tracing can finish that area, but they'd have to do it in some kind of way of a smooth transition. Obviously, you don't want just some jarring switch to the better lighting every time you enter a
yeah. I
room.
think that would be the problem is the jarring
Yeah.
switch.
There'd have to be some kind of blend where it slowly does it, where the lighting slowly gets better. Kind of like what
I,
we've seen with some of the Epic's new engine, Unreal Engine, where you walk into an area and it's like,
yeah, but I feel like a
yeah,
consistent timing difference because of the way that like the Unreal
yeah,
5 global illumination works like that. Yes, it takes a couple of frames to update, but it's a consistent couple of frames.
that's true. That's true. So it's behind
And
the same amount.
if you're already having a couple of frames for that to happen in non ray traced GI, then
Yeah,
if you're still gonna have that difference, there's no point in doing the transition.
that's true. That's true. Yeah, but it'll still be interesting. Yeah, and I mean, you can obviously turn the ray tracing down to match what that card can do as well. So
Yeah, and that's more
yeah.
so like what I'm thinking is like, there will be like a 3080 optimized setting
Hmm.
for the ray tracing hardware, probably done via GeForce Experience, where they'll have
Yeah.
something where it's like you can turn on in GeForce Experience the ray tracing settings optimized for that card. And with
Yeah.
those settings, you wouldn't see a performance hit. But if you decided to go above that, then that's when you'd see the performance hit.
And maybe even see something like that in game settings, right? Where you have like a ray tracing level and you select your card,
Mhm.
because then they
I
know
mean, the
what.
game can also just auto detect your card and have that be the default ray tracing setting.
Yeah, that's true. But here's the other thing though too, right? So if it's a coprocessor, maybe that coprocessor is going to be the same throughout the whole ray trace lineup, right? And then just the
That's
regular,
possible unless
yeah.
VRAM mattered for the performance, because we are looking
Hmm.
at different VRAM speeds and stuff across the stack. From my understanding, so
Yeah.
the 3080 is expected to be 19 gigabits per second,
Hmm.
whereas like the 3090 is expected to be up to 21.
Yeah.
And my guess would be that 3070 and 3060 are probably going to use GDDR6 like at the top end, so probably 16.
So if
Um,
that bandwidth is shared, though, right, then those bandwidth decreases, they could still have the same amount of bandwidth for the coprocessor, right, and just have
that's
the
true.
decrease for the main chip that handles everything else. And so
Mhm.
maybe that's what they're gonna do is they're gonna be like you're selecting your performance in game, and it's not affecting your ray tracing performance. That would be really interesting. That would be
And that would make
interesting.
it
Yeah.
so much easier for developers to optimize for.
Yeah. Yeah.
If
It's
there
like
was
this
a
is just what we have.
if there was like a singular ray tracing target
Hmm.
per generation of GPU.
That would be really nice. That would be really easy for developers, better for optimization, and less confusing on consumers because you just turn on ray tracing, and that ray
Mhm.
tracing is built for that series. And older games you just turn it on because they're going to be less performance requirements for that.
Yeah.
So
Even if that's not what they're doing this generation, depending on how much the cost of that coprocessor is, that might be something that they should consider long term.
yeah, because in a lot of ways too, when you have silicon, right, like manufacturing more of the same one is cheaper than trying to make different levels.
Yeah, I mean it's why we oftentimes see cards that are like, the 80 card is often just a cut down version of the
Of whatever the max
TI
like
or of
Titan
the
is. Yeah.
Titan is, yeah.
Yeah, like yeah.
We already see that, where they're literally making the same GPUs and just changing the price.
Yeah, yeah, and just selecting the slightly lower quality silicon bits. for those sometimes and in some cases, as we see, like photolitho quality go up and have the more consistency in the amount of chips that you can get out of a single wafer that can hit full performance, they'll still just take those, and even though they could sell them for more, they'll just turn off course to keep up with demand. So so that could be interesting. That could be a really cool way of doing it. And so then you're back to kind of selecting a GPU around all the other things, and you're not having to think about the ray tracing portion.
Yeah, that would be cool. You know what else would be cool though? And speaking of selecting things,
Yeah,
if you could select alternate app stores,
it would be interesting. So yeah, this has been an interesting week in regards to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so Epic Games, the bad guys of the PC gaming space, and I don't know why they're the bad guy. Like, I get that they bought exclusive games temporarily, but like they also gave us, like, literally it was Epic that got us cross-platform play.
Yeah, they were the main push for it.
Literally it was Epic, and before they had even launched the store, their threat of bringing a store at a much lower cost to developers that caused Steam to drop their price for games that had sold enough on their store.
Yep. And they've helped developers drastically. Some indie developers and stuff like that, and that's been one of the focuses of their new engine too, is to help small developers. So they've done a lot of good.
Now what we're seeing is that they are going to war with Google and Apple.
Yeah.
So what happened this week was Epic dropped an update in the game. Now this was not published like an update through the store. So likely what happened was that they actually put the code in for this like in a previous update.
Yeah.
And then just changed a server-side flag to make it go through now so that it could pass through validation. Because if they would have put this in as an actual update, Apple would have just blocked the update, and so would Google.
Yeah.
But what they did was they added an alternate payment option into the store. And this was a way to buy your V-Bucks without paying Google or Apple the 30% split. And what they did was they dropped the price of the V-Bucks by 20% on Android, iOS, PC, Mac, Xbox, and PlayStation, but not if you bought them on the through the iOS payment method or the Android payment method.
Yeah.
And the whole intent of this was passing along the savings to consumers. Now, the reason I put that in quotes, despite the fact that I generally like Epic, is that they didn't pass along the savings on on console. Yeah. Console charges the same split, but they're saying that they're passing along some magical savings that they're not getting.
Yeah, well, right. Yeah, it's weird. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm not understanding this right, but on console, when you use the alternate store, you don't get the discount, right? It's not like with...
No. So on console, there is no alternate payment method. They only push this through on iOS and Android. They're giving the discount. They're literally giving the discount to you on every platform unless you pay through the iOS or the Android official payment methods. So that means that they are losing... So, like, it makes sense that they can afford to pass along savings on the Epic Store and on their own payment methods on Android and iOS. But there's no savings for them to pass along on console, and they're still dropping the price.
And we're sure with console, right, that there is that 30% cut for in-game transactions, not just for the game purchase. Okay.
Unless they worked out some special deal, which they are not talking about, and they're not acting like they are.
Which they have before, but they usually talk about it.
Well, and then also, like, with the antitrust scrutinies that are going around, special deals are not something that I think anybody would be making right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so from what it looks like, they are essentially just, in order to put pressure on Google and Apple, and make it look like they are just essentially to put pressure on them, they're losing money on PC, or not on PC, on console, and lying to consumers that they're passing along savings. Now, it's cool that they're willing to lose money to make a point and to throw some shade at Google and Apple. But I don't think that they should be essentially lying. Like, if you look at their page about the price drops, it doesn't say anything about the fact that they're just taking a little bit less of a profit on console. They're literally lying and saying they're passing along the savings, which is just such a confusing thing for me, because overall I agree with what they're trying to do, and I don't necessarily disagree. I think that they could be more effective in other ways, but I don't necessarily disagree with how they're going about it.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And
It's
so it's just weird that they're essentially like lying about the console side of things, and rather than trying to get console to drop their pricing as well.
right.
And I
Yeah,
get that
yeah.
like Sony has like a small like a 5% investment in Epic now.
Hmm.
Um but like that's going to really hurt Epic's case if a 5% investment in them is enough for them to sway not doing this on console, but they are doing this on Android and iOS. Like if Apple bought
Yeah.
5%, would they stop?
Right, right, yeah, and so it's a little bit weird, and I don't personally see the consoles being less predatory in a way, with the cut than iOS and Android. Being
Especially on Android, where on Android, not just can you run your app through another service or another app store,
yeah, or no
Epic
app store.
launched Epic launched Fortnite without using an app store on
Yeah,
Android. That
yeah,
was how it launched. Like you got the beta on Samsung devices. They literally made deals with OEMs and they didn't go about using the store. And
hmm
it still reached the point where for whatever reason they had to cave and switch to Android. And yet they're trying to say that they will, like one of their end goals with this is forcing Apple to allow other app stores.
but
And the thing is that they're saying that they'll release their own app store if they do that. But why haven't they done that on Android? Because
yeah,
if my goal was to create a store to make my business money, and I was going to make one for Android anyway, and my goal was to make it so that regulators would force Apple to open up the ability for me to make a store there. Well, you obviously can't just like develop both at the exact same time anyway, because they're very different platforms and their
yeah,
games that are on those platforms are different. So the most logical thing would be develop for Android, your app store, release it,
yeah.
gain some market share, show that it would actually make a meaningful difference for competition,
Have some level of proof. Yeah, yeah,
and then go to regulators and say, look at what we can't do on Apple. Or if it doesn't work, say, look at why we need Google and Apple to be forced to change their pricing because
yeah,
app stores don't work. You really
yeah,
think that if they can't make an app store or even just the biggest game in the world, if they can't make that exist off the app store on Android, you really think that's going to work on iOS where nobody that uses that is
yeah,
like used to downloading elsewhere and nobody that uses that like it's generally a less tech savvy platform.
yeah. And so
And so
having
that's
a level of proof that, like, hey, this doesn't work, so we need a fix, I
yeah,
think would be
either
the
it works
result.
and they can prove it and pressure Apple that way, or it
Hmm.
doesn't work and they can prove it and pressure regulators to drop pricing.
And I think the likelihood is that it wouldn't work.
Oh yeah, if
Um,
they can't get Fortnite to work off the App Store, I don't. The
yeah,
thing that with mobile games is that they don't have the types of games that would pull people to other platforms in the same way. There's a
yeah,
few select big games that I think could probably be a bit of a pull, but
right,
not enough to make another App Store work. And so at
yeah,
that point,
yeah.
you don't have the advantage of buying exclusives like they've done on PC.
Well, then it's also harder for it to integrate with like a Google and Apple's integrated like Game Center stuff.
Oh, they wouldn't do that. I mean,
Yeah,
it would be just like having a game exist off, off Steam. You don't
right, right,
integrate with that.
exactly. So I feel like,
Um,
but they like if they're willing to lose money to prove a point on console, they're losing money, like you said, or in some ways, they are making less money. Um, like I feel kind of like, why aren't they willing to lose money by paying their developers to build an app store that can then prove that it doesn't work?
especially if they're claiming that the end goal is to do that anyway.
Yeah, right, right,
If
exactly.
your
And so
goal
it's
is to
just
build your own app store,
then
then
do it.
build your own app store where you can already do that.
Yeah, yeah. There's nothing on Android stopping you from that, and you can make the argument of side loading apps, but like, yeah, Amazon's App Store and stuff like that have gotten around that by saying, hey, a couple clicks and you can turn on side loading apps. It's not hard.
Yeah.
Like they
And
have a
then the other
quick
thing is
little instruction about it.
I know that I think they're one of the things they're like in their lawsuit with Google is
Uh huh.
alleging that Google is blocking them from making deals with OEMs about app stores. But from what I had read into that, what it was in specific that they're going after is that LG and Google had separate from the requirements for having the Play Store. This is not a part of that.
Yeah.
Had made a separate contract where Google was paying them. I don't know if it was, what all the details were, but essentially there was a separate arrangement not tied into the Play services that LG had agreed not to use other app store or to preload other app stores,
Right.
which is fine because you know what? Epic would probably be signing a contract with LG if they could to have their app on there. So if they can sign a contract to do that, then Google can sign a contract to not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they've already made partnerships with Samsung. Like if Epic can do that, then they can do that with their game store. And let's be real, Samsung is much more meaningful than LG as far as market share.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, they are the biggest smartphone
Like
manufacturer.
if you can already
Yeah.
make deals with Samsung for Fortnite, then you could probably grow your game store pretty fast if you had compelling games. And that
Yeah.
is what I think is the issue. Is
Yeah.
that for a game store on a mobile platform, there isn't compelling games right now.
Yeah.
What
I
I
think that's
think
going
that
to
Epic
change.
could do is I think that Epic could leverage Unreal Engine and leverage investments in indie developers. And I think that they could try and bring some bigger games to mobile because we know that
Yeah.
higher end Android phones can make good game. Like you can play some pretty damn good games. We know that ARM is no longer as restrictive of a processor for games as it used to be.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
Developers are used to making games for ARM. You can prove that with the Switch.
Yep. Yep. So
So
it seems like in some ways like a load of excuses, right?
yeah,
I don't know.
it's one of those weird things where like I completely support the end goal, and I think that if they were also going the route of making their own app store, I would fully support what they're doing. But it's just a
Right.
weird thing where they have what, in my opinion, would be a much more effective way to show regulators that there's an actual problem, and they're not doing that.
Right, and I think that's the important end goal, and it's just a little bit weird because I feel like they've had a lot of good tactics to do that sort of thing on other platforms and in other
Mhm.
instances, and they're just going about this one incorrectly. And I don't know, it's a little bit odd, and as a result of this, right, Apple and Google both completely banned them from their
Yes.
stores. Yeah,
Yeah. Fortnite is banned, and I don't realistically see it coming back anytime soon because it's not like they can just say they removed the code and then Google and Apple will be like, okay, cool, you no longer violate the rules because they put in this code stealthily. So Google and Apple have no reason to trust that they won't do it again.
yeah, yeah. So it'd be hard for them to re-enable it. It's it's weird, and I guess one thing I wanted to touch on here is I feel like there are a lot of people that are like rooting for Epic here, and I'm rooting for the cause that they're aiming for, but like they're going about it wrong, and instead of saying thank you Epic for suing these companies and trying to do this, I think the solution would be thank you for your goal, but you're not gonna win this.
Yeah.
Like
Like
it's
if
just
their
weird.
goal was just the lower costs, then I think that this would not necessarily be a bad strategy.
Yeah,
But when they're literally trying to claim that they are trying to free Apple users from the tyranny of the App Store and that
yeah,
they are so adamant on making another App Store, like again, prove it can work because you already
yeah.
said when you first launched the Epic Store, you said you'd bring us an Android Epic Store, and you haven't.
Yeah, and they already have this platform and server level stuff for it. It's just a matter of coding something that connects to the same
Yeah,
service. And
because like
it's weird.
I would love to be able to more because you already can get other app stores on iOS without jailbreaking. There is a way to get Alt Store.
Yeah.
It's
It's
doable.
more complicated
Um,
than Android, but yeah.
yeah, but like there are ways to do it. I would love for there to be easier ways for me as a power user to install apps outside of the App Store.
Yes.
Um,
But
and so it's like that
power
would be
user is the
great,
key
but
word there.
yeah, but like really what it comes down to is like even if they have that, like it's not going to be meaningful competition to force Apple to change any of their App Store policies outside of that. So let's say regulators come in. Let's
Hmm.
say Epic is successful in putting pressure on regulators to put pressure on Apple, and regulators tell Apple, okay, you're now required to allow other app stores. If they just do that, that would actually probably be best case scenario for Apple.
Yeah.
Because you know what that wouldn't do? That wouldn't put any actual pressure or and have any sort of meaningful change on App Store market share in any country other than China.
Yeah.
Like that would probably really help Tencent in China,
Yeah.
but it wouldn't change things in the US or Europe or
Canada,
Canada,
yeah, all the yeah.
any of the other major markets.
Yeah.
And so it's like I
It's a
don't
little
get
weird.
this whole idea that, because like I understand the idea that competition is good for consumers,
Yes.
but the reality of the situation is that more app stores being allowed doesn't actually, in this case, increase competition.
Right.
App stores are at this point so entrenched that the focus needs to be on regulating so that the apps on them are appropriately competitive. But this
Right.
idea that you're going to come in with another app store and all of a sudden compete is not realistic.
It's not realistic. No, no. And kind of going back to what I was saying about, people that are rooting Epic on this. It's a little bit weird to me because there's been other stuff that Epic has done that has actually worked, been a good tactic, and been good for the gaming environment that people complained about. And exclusives,
Yeah.
like you said, is one of those where they're like, Epic's paying for these exclusives. And I mean, I'm not a fan of exclusivity. Like, I like things that are available everywhere and that I'm not forced to use a specific store. But at the same time, the purpose of what they were doing there was to try and reduce the cost for developers and make things better for developers. And they have influenced the market drastically in that way. But people complained about it. But now they're doing something that is very unlikely to really be that successful and do what we really want to have happen. And people are all like really happy for them. And so I think it kind of in some ways leads to some of the misinformation when people are making judgments on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to the fact that like there's a reason they chose to do this so soon after the antitrust hearings.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to, is they're trying to take advantage of the antitrust hearings, which is a smart way to do it. But again, I think that again, like, just all I'll say on this to end the topic is, like, if the end goal for Epic that they're claiming is true of creating another app store, then create the other app store where you can do that and prove that it'll work. Prove that it will
Yep.
create meaningful change, because that would be the easiest way to win over regulators. Either you're successful and you win, or you lose and you win. No matter what, you win by going that route. Whereas this, I don't know if it will work.
Yeah. I don't know if it will either. So we'll see how it goes. I would like to see lower costs from these stores, on developers for sure. But that doesn't seem to be, the goal that they're pushing
And then,
for, right?
like when you look at just pushing for lower costs, like, I guess, how do you decide as a regulator what the right cost is? Because, like, Google and or Android and iOS are so fundamentally different in so many ways. Like, Google makes money from so many other things on the platform, as far as, like,
Yeah.
using your data for search. And Apple is so focused on privacy that realistically, it would make the most sense that Apple's App Store cut is a little bit higher than Android's, because they need to make money elsewhere. But how do you decide what that right amount is?
Yeah. And even then, like, I mean, I definitely feel like 30% is in a lot of ways high, right? Like,
Oh, I agree.
because it's like, oh, here's, like, we're providing you a storefront and we're providing you servers to store your app that's 50 megabytes or 10 megabytes,
And
right?
well, and we're providing you APIs, we're providing you new tools for development,
Yeah,
we're
of
providing
course.
curation, we're providing, and so
However,
it's
a
like,
lot of that stuff is provided even with free stuff, right? Like for free apps, APIs and stuff like that.
yeah, but they make their money from in-app purchases and stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, I suppose.
You
But
can release an app for completely free and not have ads and stuff.
yeah,
But, like,
it's not common.
that is not common. Like,
Mhm.
most developers that are spending time making apps do it with the intention on making some kind of money.
Yeah, which just makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you're investing time in something that other people are utilizing, most situations would want to make money from it.
Yeah.
And it's like, so they're providing all of this stuff, and they're, it's like, how do you, I guess, put a price on everything from the actual storefront and servers to the curation to the APIs to the user base to all of that,
Yeah.
and do it in a way that's not going to be so low, it, for example, on iOS, that it harms Apple's goal of putting a focus on privacy, but you put it low enough that it doesn't harm developers as much as it might otherwise be.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
And that's where it's like, again, if Epic can make an alternate app store at a lower price work,
then
then
that'd
that
be
would be the
great.
best case scenario, because then they could compete for what that price should be.
Right. And yeah, and in fact, in some ways they could also use that as a like, right, there would be a direct incentive to use their store, because it's like, oh, you can get it through the regular store too, but you have to pay more.
Mhm.
So it's
Yeah,
like, oh, okay. So, and they could even advertise, like, in game, right, when you're purchasing V-Bucks, like, if you'd like to get these for cheaper, go
you can't
download
do
the
that.
Epic store. Yeah.
Nope, can't do that.
That's not allowed.
Not on iOS, and I don't think on Android.
I feel like maybe that should change. But even so,
Yeah,
people would
and
know
see, that's one of
online.
those things where it's like maybe that is one of the things that could change, that would have a positive impact on price competition
Yeah.
without running into the same issue that theoretically an alternate purchase method in app may have to, and maybe just allowing alternate purchase methods in app would be a better way to do it too. Like, there's all these different things that I think are better solutions than just an alternate app store that's not going to work.
Yeah, I think so too, definitely. So, I guess we'll see what comes of it. I'm sure we'll have more to report on this probably next week
Yeah,
and the week after. It'll be a kind of a rolling topic.
yeah, and
But
this was a big thing. Like, when this first dropped, I was like, when I first saw that Epic had pushed in their alternate payment method, I was like, did Apple change App Store rules? Like, what the
yeah,
fuck? That seems like a wild thing to change by just letting Epic drop it. Like, it seems like the
yeah,
type of thing, especially due to regulatory concerns, that they would have uh, dropped like as an update and said, "Hey, developers, this is a change.
hmm
You can now implement this."
but instead they just like
Um,
Epic just did it.
yeah.
Yeah, kind of crazy.
So
Well, I
we'll
think that
see. I mean, I hope it drives prices down for developers, and I hope that it opens up like alternate purchase methods in app. Um,
yeah.
I just don't think like an alternate app store is actually going to have any meaningful impact on competition, and so I really hope that the end result isn't just regulators force alternate app stores to be allowed.
I agree. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there needs to be more that goes into it for sure. Well, I think that wraps that up and rolls us into our other various topics this week. And those of you that were really like coming to the show exclusively for tiny news, we don't have any tiny news this week. We just have the other bigger topics, and I'm
Oh,
so
I can get you
sorry.
some tiny news. I can get you some tiny news.
Okay, okay, good. I know some people come here just for the tiny news segment in the last like 5 minutes. Like, that's
Oh,
important. They
totally.
watch the whole thing so they can see that tiny news. So the next topic though that we wanted to talk about was Mozilla. The Mozilla organization makes Firefox, as some people here, well, actually most probably know, but most of you have probably heard of Firefox, and Mozilla runs Firefox, right? So
What's Firefox?
even most normal people, right, that they know Firefox, but they may not know that it's developed by Mozilla. Mozilla is the organization that develops that, and unfortunately, they've been struggling financially due to the coronavirus pandemic, and so they had to lay off 250 people, which doesn't sound like I mean, that's a lot of people, but it doesn't sound like a huge number in comparison to some of the other layoffs we've seen. But keep in mind, they only had 1,000 employees, so that was a quarter of their workforce. They're down to 750 people now, which is still
Yeah.
not like minuscule for an open source development place.
And this includes their entire MDN team, which makes like a bunch of documentation for developers on new things within web. So this actually like has an adverse side effect in just overall web development.
Yeah, and that was actually something, before I start talking about what some of their future plans are, I wanted to touch base on was Mozilla and Firefox as a whole have been a huge benefit to the internet in general. It's not just that they've made a browser, right? Like Firefox has, or Mozilla has developed a lot of stuff that has actually helped in terms of coding and stuff for the internet and for websites. And it's just disappointing to see some of that being damaged because of, in some ways, in my opinion, unfair competition, which I'll get to later. And so I'm just, it disappoints me that this is happening, but I understand why they had to do it, right? Like, they are struggling financially. They've had a very, they're dwindling in market share. They have less than 10% of the browser market share now. And that was as of, I think that changed this year. I think we reported that in another WordCast. And so I'm personally disappointed in this. But I understand why they had to do it. Um,
Yeah.
it's it's kind of sad. Like, it's a little bit emotional because Firefox has been something that's been really important in more ways than most people know, right? They've been
Yeah.
important for a lot of
Well,
stuff.
like with the MDN thing, like they have an entire um like platform, like a learning area on their website to learn how to become like a front end developer.
Yeah,
Um,
like
and
that's
it's
a
like,
big deal.
yeah, they've had this since like 2015, and it's like a very good like list of documents and guides and stuff. And so them having to get rid of that, including like it especially sucks because they just added new features for it in June.
Yeah.
And now they're laying off the entire team that did that, and so it's not going to get updated anymore.
Yeah, yeah, and it sucks. And so I do want to, speaking of that team though and stuff, I do want to mention to some people that may be questioning it because there's a lot of people on Reddit asking about it. The Servo browser project is
Mm.
not being halted because of this. Mozilla is still a sponsor of that. They still have developers working on it. And for those that don't know, Servo is a new browser engine that they're working on that I think is eventually supposed to replace the Gecko engine that Firefox runs on now. That is a parallelized, really high performance browser is the goal, and it's like built from the ground up. And so we'll see if we start to see a dwindle in the amount of code updates to that, but they're claiming that it shouldn't see much of an effect. So I hope that's true. And in fact, I
I
forgot.
would be surprised if it did, since from my understanding, Samsung is also working on it. So
Yeah,
there's
yeah, there's
probably
like
some
lots of
some
sponsors.
separate funding mechanism for that.
Yeah, it's not like it's Firefox's, like it's not like Mozilla's the only one doing it, right? It's not
Yeah,
their like Gecko is the same thing where it's primarily developed by Mozilla, but like it is open source, right? It's kind of like Chromium and the Chromium project and Blink, right? Where it's like an open source sort of thing, and it looks like Servo could be a really big deal. I don't know if there's a lot of I wish I could find a good list of the sponsors. Their site is not the best at that. But the main primary sponsor is Mozilla, and it's written in Rust, so which is a pretty interesting programming language.
that's Rusty.
Rusty. So a couple of other things about this. So Taipei office has completely closed. Mozilla's Taipei office is done for. So that also sucks, but their U.S. office is still in place, and
That's good because I know where one of their U.S. offices is.
yeah, yeah.
It's
So
right
it's
next to
good.
my work.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so the way they're planning to make money around this is they want to try and start making money from services they provide instead of just sponsorships, which I'll talk about the sponsorships in a second. But they've got their VPN service, which is pretty good. I'd actually encourage people to go check it out. It's a pretty interesting VPN service. It's maybe not as feature packed in some ways as like PIA and stuff like that, but it is good, and I trust their privacy and security probably more than pretty much any of the other VPN services that are out right now, including PIA. I have some questions because of them getting bought out by whatever company it was, and it wasn't. I can't remember if it was Norton. I think maybe bought them. I can't remember. Somebody bought them, but
Now,
yeah. So they're
do you know much about Molvad?
no.
Okay, because that's who they're actually using for their servers. Like Mozilla is not spinning up their own VPN servers.
Right, right, but they do have a
They're
level of
essentially,
control.
yeah, they're essentially like selling their their software over Molvad's servers.
Right, right. Well, it's kind of like all the alternate cell carriers, that similar style thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, so they're just using they're harnessing the server power from somebody else, but they do have a lot of locations. It seems to be a pretty reliable service. And then one of the other things that they're hoping to make money on is Pocket, right? Which they bought Pocket a while ago. Some people say maybe it wasn't the best idea to buy it, but Pocket is a service to save like news articles and stuff that you want to read. And there is a premium version of it that doesn't just pull the data from the site, but actually stores a copy of that Pocket listing. And so even if somebody takes down a website, you can still view your Pocket listing that's a copy of that site. Among some other benefits that you get with Pocket Premium. And so that's one that I would maybe encourage people to go with if they don't need a VPN service, if you just are interested in helping support them. It's I think it's $5 a month, and it's got quite a few features that go along with it. And Pocket is actually particularly interesting in my experience because one of the things is when there's research articles and stuff, I like to read them on my Kobo, and Kobo integrates with Pocket directly. Pocket tries to integrate with a lot of services, and so like I can save an article to Pocket from my feed reader, and then I can go read that on something that's better for my eyes at a later point in time.
yeah. Another thing that Mozilla also does that I don't think right now brings in a lot of money, but I think if they can scale it up, it will, is they have Firefox Reality, which is like a content platform for virtual reality content, and you can use it on your Vive, on your
Yeah,
Oculus,
yeah, that's
on
right.
Windows AR
It's pretty cool.
devices. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's another awesome thing that they're doing that you can go try if you have a VR headset. Um, and then to jump into their sponsorships and stuff a little bit here. So they've made most of their money in the past off of like Google and other search engines, but primarily Google paying to be the default
Yeah, it's
browser.
Google in the US. I forgot the name of the Russian one, but there's like a different one in Russia and a different one in certain parts of Asia.
Yeah, yeah. And so they pay to be the default. Like that's a competition thing where browsers will kind of, or not browsers, search engine companies will kind of bid to be like, hey, we'll pay to be the default on your browser. And so Google has been the primary one and has been making most of their money off of that. They don't make a lot off of like their homepage ads and stuff like that. And obviously it's an open source project. They're not like selling the code for this or anything either. So
Yeah, and
yeah.
in the context of Mozilla and Google, they have like renewed their agreement. It's not fully confirmed like to the public yet,
Mm-hmm.
so we don't have an exact dollar amount, but it's estimated to be between 400 and 450 million a year through 2023.
Okay, so yeah, they'll at least be around until that point in time, and hopefully that gives them enough time to start making revenue in other directions, in
Yeah,
case Google doesn't renew it again. Because if their market share continues to dwindle, Google's not going to care about paying for it then at that point.
no, they will.
You think so?
It's a monopoly protection thing.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And that was something that I wanted to touch base on too. Is like, it's a lot of people use Chrome, and a lot of that is because of branding and advertising, and that's part of what's made the Chromium project so popular and why most alternate browsers are using the Chromium project instead of Gecko and use the Blink engine is because that's what every site's built for now because most people use Chrome. Um, and, Microsoft Edge being pushed in that direction as well has kind of dwindled that even more. And now it really is like you kind of can't count apples because Safari isn't on PC anymore. So it really is a duopoly sort of thing, right? Where you have Chromium and you have Gecko.
Yeah, and like I wonder how much all of the drama with Firefox Send hurt them financially too.
I didn't hear a ton about that actually. So
So
what was going on with it?
So for those that don't know, Firefox Send is disabled. And the reason that it's currently disabled is because it was being used to send malware back and forth, among
Oh,
other things. And so they are changing some things. When they reopen, you'll have to use a Firefox account to be able to utilize it. You won't be able to just send information anymore. And
hmm.
then they're trying to figure out ways to improve reporting and abuse and stuff, abuse protections and stuff. Um,
That's disappointing that people had to ruin that because it was a good feature. It was a good
it was
service.
a good feature, and it's like it's one of those things they spent a bunch of money developing, and then it got, you know,
Ruined by
taken advantage of so that
assholes.
people could send malware.
That sucks. Yeah, because they could send like a browser link, right? And then it looks legit because it's from,
Well,
you know,
yeah,
Mozilla.
that, and then
Yeah.
also like if you're like selling malware code, you could
You can
send the
transmit it that way.
file. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so it was a pretty privacy focused one too, so it was less likely that you'd run into
yeah. They only
virus
suspended that
scans.
last month, so we don't really have an estimate as to when it's going to be brought back.
Maybe they'll bring it back with like a premium feature that adds more speed or something. I don't know, but they're definitely
Yeah, well, like, and
looking.
that's why I had even pulled it up now. As I was wondering if they had like a premium option for sending larger file sizes and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, because that would be interesting. High speed, large file size sending. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens when it comes back, but I would encourage people to, in some way, if you care about there being more openness in the browser markets and stuff like that, and care about what Mozilla has done for the internet, to try and go support them in one way or another. By paying for Pocket Premium, paying for the VPN, or just trying to get more users on Firefox. And while they don't make money from that, like just having the bigger market share is a justification to try and charge places like Google even more potentially for their default browser. But then also having bigger market share, more people being aware of it, it's more likely that they'll go try those other services like the VPN. And especially being so privacy focused, like people will care about potentially using their VPN and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I just realized I've been slowly moving away from the mic. I apologize, everybody.
good job.
Just like slowly getting quieter. Um,
Good job.
I am a good job. So the next thing I wanted to talk about here was just an interesting topic to me. So there's been a bunch of updates to the new Storinator chassis from 45 drives. For those that don't know what it is, it's a big server chassis that's designed to hold a massive amount of hard drives, specifically for like network attached storage usage, and also like clustering network attached storage usage. So potentially 10 of these in a big server rack or something like that, or 20 of them. And so there's been some updates to the chassis that have been actually really interesting, and so I wanted to touch base on them really quick. So they did some redesigning on the chassis. It has better airflow now, including better airflow for the rear chamber where all of the other components are. And I will say I have direct experience with the Storinator. I've worked with the Storinator 60 drive model and built an ASIN one, so I do have some direct experience, and it already is one of the quietest storage servers I've ever dealt with. Particularly least annoying because it has pretty low pitch fans. They don't whine as much, so it's not as annoying when it's running. Power supplies are still a little loud, but the cooling performance in that rear chamber has actually not been a big issue in my experience. Now, the use case that the one that I work on is in is not under a really high CPU load very often, so maybe some other people have had some issues, especially if they don't have like an air conditioned room that it's running in. But it's still cool to see an improvement there, even on an area that, in my experience, doesn't really need improvement. So that was nice. And then they've also, one of the biggest change to the design is they have a back plane for the drives now, and they're calling it a direct wire back plane. So those that have looked at it or watched Linus Tech Tips or something before, they have these little SATA and SAS adapters, and then they're plugged into a wire directly and mounted in the chassis, and so you put the drives into that. This new back plane is similar, but it's one PCB, but still everything is wired up directly, and so it's a little bit more reliable, a little bit easier for things to be aligned and stuff like that. So it is an improvement. The cages for the hard drives, and by cages I mean the chamber that they all go in, is now modular, removable, so you can take it out to work on things easier, because that was one of the other things, is when you had a cable fail, it was a huge pain to fix the thing. So I hope that never happens to the one I built. Taking these things apart can be a pain, so this is a big improvement. Vibration is lower, and then the big one that I'm really excited about, the biggest one in my opinion, is EPYC server CPUs are now finally on the Storinator. And in some ways that's not like this hugely necessary thing, because of the fact that like most of it's just these big hard drives, right? And so like a lot of times they're not under high CPU load, but there are workloads where you would have it under high CPU load, or potentially run a bunch of virtual machines, and having that ability to do high core count CPUs and stuff is like awesome.
Yeah.
I think it's exciting. I see that you're finding some tiny news here, so for those that are really waiting out for that, that's exciting.
Yes.
But yeah, so I was happy to see some changes on that. The thing's been around for quite a while, and it's some much needed adjustments in my opinion. So definitely cool. So another thing in relation to storage that I did want to talk about here was FreeNAS/Truenas. So there was a Truenas 12.0 beta 2 update. It's now available. I have not installed it on my NAS yet. I'm actually not running Truenas. Yes, I'm on FreeNAS still, but it's focused around performance increases. I know it's in beta, and I do have data I really care about there, so I don't want to nuke anything.
Excuses. Wait, no excuses.
I may go for it. The way they've changed their build sets, like this beta here is actually closer to what would have been the release channel in the past. So most people that have talked about it, the only thing they've had issues with is plugins, which I don't really use anymore. So I may go ahead and just switch to it and give it a shot, but it still makes me nervous because I'd hate to have to re-download all my data.
No excuses.
No excuses. So they've improved NUMA support. That is for like multiple CPUs and stuff like that, as well as the architecture that EPYC uses, so it could potentially improve performance on the new Storinator. So NUMA node performance has been increased. They also have a really big update to the level 2 ARC, which is essentially a read cache, to put it simply. And so that is they have a persistent on reboot level 2 ARC. And so what you'd have to do in the past when you had a level 2 ARC, which was usually on a SSD, and that's address replacement cache, I think, or not address, something else, but you'd have it on an SSD, but then when the server rebooted, it'd have to rebuild that. And so say you had like a 10 terabyte L2 ARC, it would take like forever for the server to get back up to the full performance that it was before the reboot. So that's a big deal, is now it's persistent where it can reboot and that data is still there ready to go. And then OpenZFS 2.0 includes faster boot times, which in my opinion is much needed. FreeNAS takes forever to boot up, so I'm excited to try that. SMB single client performance has been improved, and the max number of clients is 50% increased. NFS single client performance has been improved. But one of the things that I put in bold here, because I actually wanted to Daniel to touch base on this too, because this was something we talked about in the past. So they now are utilizing non-volatile memory DIMMs, which is something that, remember when we talked about those when they first came out, we're like, what is going to be the use case for this? It'll be interesting to see. We're finally starting to see some of that in even more like consumer type products. And so what it is essentially the write cache, the ZFS intent log or slog, has been put on NVDIMMs. Like you can put it on NVDIMMs now, and actually each NVDIMM can be assigned to its own storage pool. So that's really, really cool. There's a lot of benefits that can come along with that. And so I think it's cool to just finally see those being used, because we haven't seen them anywhere really.
Yeah.
And then the last thing in regards to that is they have done some stuff to improve performance. IX Systems has helped ZFS 2.0 support asynchronous copy on write performance and DMU. So that's just some performance improvement that I won't go into mega detail about, but pretty cool to see a big update like that. It's pretty huge.
I feel like you should have a show called Mega Detail.
Mega detail. It's like pick one topic and talk about it in a ton of detail every week.
Like an unnecessary amount. Like you have like a 4-hour podcast on something super minor.
Yeah. I think that could actually be kind of fun. Yeah,
it's like so entertaining. Everyone would just love.
Everybody would watch it. Like, hey, here's a 1-hour video on like the I don't even know what like what kind of super little topic could be talked about. I guess one of these tiny news topics. How about this? Like
no. You'd have an 1.5 hour long video on NVMe prioritization that only consoles and servers use.
Yes, I think that would be a good idea. Yeah, or just talk for like 2 hours about two-factor authentication for Tesla.
It can't be something. No. It can't be something that simple.
It has to be something that's
has to be
just super niche but complicated.
Yes, but it also has to be something that you haven't researched. So like you're just talking about it out of your ass for an 1.5 hours,
or talking about it while doing the research. So it's like, never mind.
That'd be too dry.
Yeah, maybe so.
You have to like confidently talk for an 1.5 hours on something you have no idea about.
That would be a lot of fun, Yeah, I could jump in and talk about, like, I could talk about like a Ceph storage clustering for like 2 hours, which is something I've never done. I just know it exists. Yeah, that would be a good idea. Just, you have SSDs hanging off of a server rack. So this next one here was interesting. I don't know if you read into this much, but
not at all.
Oh, okay. So there is unfortunately a fairly easy way for your phone calls on your phone to be eavesdropped on. So voice over LTE or VoLTE has been a thing that's been around for a while that has really increased like both call volume capacity on networks as well as call quality. So we know way back in the days before LTE existed, call quality was absolutely awful on cell phones. So this was a big thing when it came out, and it was supposed to also add a lot of security to your phone calls. But it turns out that for less than $7,000 worth of gear, you can pretty easily eavesdrop on conversations. And you do have to know the target phone number that you want to eavesdrop on. That's not necessarily the hardest thing to get, though. It's not like having to know somebody's password or something, right? They've dubbed it ReVolt, which is an interesting name. I always like the security names here. But anyway, so it's pretty cheap for somebody to do if they really wanted to try and get information from somebody that was private, like, attacking somebody that's important. This wouldn't be that hard. And researchers were able to recover and decrypt the information from these calls for 89% of the calls that they did eavesdrop on. So it's pretty high success rate and pretty easy to do.
See, here's my thing. Can't have your calls eavesdropped on if you just don't have anybody to talk to. So everyone should just isolate from everyone socially. Don't talk to anyone ever.
Like, just never talk to anybody ever.
Yeah, quarantining for COVID, that was old school. Now we're quarantining from cell phones.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yeah. Well, we could go back to like landlines.
Or we could have every conversation over Starlink.
Ooh, that's a good idea. I think that's a great idea. So Starlink is interesting, and I'm excited to test it. But we do have some test data.
Yeah, so Starlink is in beta right now, private beta, and while there are NDAs, that doesn't mean that people aren't running speed tests. I think there was like a specific weekend that they were like okay to run speed tests on like public services,
Okay.
which is why it's happening now. Whereas like it's NDA'd, so like generally you wouldn't be running a speedtest.net speed test because they
Right.
know it's Starlink, um, with the way that speed test is set up. So the info that we have here though is pretty interesting, because there's two major things that people had questions about. Speed is obviously one of them, but more so with satellite-based internet is, can they get the latency down? Because there's physical limitations on what they can do with latency, and obviously current satellite internet networks have been so high up physically that they couldn't physically get the type of latency that we would expect to be more usable internet.
Yeah.
Um,
It can be so bad sometimes too. It's up to like a
yeah,
second. Sometimes it's so bad.
yeah. Whereas like that was one of the things with Starlink, was by doing low Earth orbit for the satellites, is that the physics then made sense that they could achieve lower latencies, much
Yeah.
lower latencies.
Yep.
And Elon Musk had tried to get the FCC to classify Starlink as like a low latency provider, and that stuff does matter for certain things. Obviously, not really for consumers and how it's
Yeah.
classified, but it does matter as far as funding, different approvals, all these different things. Um, and Ajit Pai had initially pushed back and was going to claim, or was going to classify them as like a high latency provider, which is 100 ms plus.
Yep.
It's a good thing that he didn't end up doing that, because what we're seeing from these speed tests is you have one speed test at 94, pretty bad, one at 75, not good, one at 53, not great, and then the rest are below 50. With
Yeah.
and there's a total of 15 right now. So you have 12 out of 15 that we know of at below 50 ms, with 4 of them being below 30.
Yeah. So that is pretty usable latency at that
Yeah.
point.
So you have 20, 20, 21, 27, 31, 31, 32, 33, 36, 39, 42, 42, 43, 75, 94. So
Yeah.
if we assume that the 94 itself is an outlier, but sometimes the 75 will happen, I would say that's much more likely. So
Hmm.
the 53 and the 75 are probably pretty likely compared to the 94. We're looking at an average that's below like 39.
Yeah, so that's pretty impressive. And just to give you an example here, like I have landline internet and pinging. Well, obviously I do. I have yeah. But pinging like Google is like 12 millisecond delay for me, and that's pinging Google. That's not anything that could be higher latency than that. And so that gives you a little bit of an idea of too, is like this is not that far off. And then of course we have games and stuff, right? Where like a lot of games are like 100 to sometimes even 150 millisecond ping. Hopefully you're in like the 50 to 60 millisecond ping range, and so Starlink's looking to be capable of being in that realm.
Yeah, and Starlink's latency um, should go, not necessarily, I wouldn't say much more down than 20, but should go down for the overall average quite a bit as they increase the amount of satellites. Therefore, they can have more granular pathing for what's going to be best for latency.
Yep.
And then also when they have more ground stations in a wider variety of areas, because right now one of the issues that you would run into is that, yeah, you can send your data from your house to the satellite, but then it just has to go down somewhere and then run over the backbone network
Yeah.
because there aren't as many ground stations. And so as they can scale up the amount of ground stations, that can also further help. My guess is that they have more ground stations in Seattle, and that's why we're seeing the average speeds in Seattle be better than the average speeds in LA.
Yeah. Yeah. Which would make sense.
Plus, from what we are to understand, the higher latitudes are where the network will launch first, so further helps support why there's lower latency in Seattle versus LA.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is exciting. And touching on speeds, because there were some speeds that were released as well.
Yeah,
Um,
so we're looking at 11 to 61 down.
yep.
And then some speed tests where the down or where the upload didn't complete, but of the ones that completed, we're looking at 4.5 as the absolute lowest and 17 as the highest.
Yes. So a couple of things there is first, that's definitely not fantastic, but is actually usable. So the first thing before we say the other aspect of it is even if this is actually what we see when it comes out, it's still going to be viable for a lot of things.
Oh yeah,
So
for rural areas, this would be game changing.
yeah, exactly. Like you can get there are people I know that like they're lucky to get like 2 megabits download, and it's really high latency because they're using satellite
And it's
internet.
usually more expensive.
Yes. So like this is still going to be a massive benefit to a large number of people, right? Like you've got to think like 50 down and like 10 up is still enough to game on and to do a lot of internet activity. It's not the fastest for downloading a game. It's not the fastest if you want to host stuff, but in those cases you shouldn't be trying to go with it anyway. But it's plenty usable for gaming, for watching video content. In fact, even watching 4K video content it's heading in that direction, and usable for several people to do normal things on the internet.
Yeah, like at these speeds, a global network, if they can offer the pricing low enough, like that could be like pretty significantly world changing because like right now
Yes.
you have like essentially pockets of the world that have amazing internet, and then you have pockets of the world with like pretty good internet. Most of like the civilized population has pretty good internet.
Yeah.
And then you have rural communities in every country, and then you have undeveloped areas, or currently developing areas that don't have particularly great internet as well.
Yep.
And if rather than trying to, let's look at either, you look at rural communities or South America or some of the developing African nations that are developing extremely fast,
Yeah.
that need to be able to scale up internet quickly and can't lay, like they just don't have the money to lay the network fast enough,
Yeah.
realistically.
Yep.
And so if you can scale up with this, where they just need to be able to grab the ground sites or the ground stations, and they don't need to be able to, or they aren't required to like lay the network, that could open up internet in areas that can otherwise afford something like this, but just currently don't have the access.
Yeah, and so this could be game changing already with those speeds. There's so many things that would benefit from it, and like you said, the pricing is like a lot of people that do have good internet access in places. There's still no competition there, right? And so
Mhm.
like in those areas, this is bringing some level of competition into those areas. And there's plenty of people I know that pay like $80 a month for their internet and are getting like 100 by 50. And it's like
Mhm.
for those people, what if they could spend half that and they're getting like 50 by 20 or something like
And
that.
that's all they need. If that's the case,
If that's
then
what they need, then it's saving them money, and it's providing some level of competition for the speeds. But
yeah. And one last thing before we move on to the next part of it.
yeah.
The latency is a big enough deal, like it is low enough that because this latency is like localized, but like the thing with wired internet versus what we are to expect from the physics of how satellite internet could work is that it actually ends up being faster than wired internet when you're looking at like very, very, very long distances.
Yeah, like here to
When you're
Oregon and New
looking at
York type stuff.
that, or even more so, like when you're talking like people in Wall Street trying to um, trade in Asia,
Yes, yeah, that's true.
that type of thing. SpaceX will be able to charge so much money for because they could charge $5,000 a month and it would be profitable for these people
Yeah, if they
because
can just
latency matters
have.
when you're trading at such a large scale.
Yeah.
And so that they could probably charge $10,000 a month and
Yep.
get people to sign up
And
for
the
that.
the underwater pipelines for that are not particularly low latency.
No.
This is going to be lower latency just because of physics. It's going to be lower latency than running light through fiber.
Mhm.
But then also the fact that it's not having to go through a lot of ground-based stations where you connect up to the satellite and then it just shoots it across the planet. pretty close to the speed of light and then back down to where it needs to be.
Yeah. And then the point I was trying to make with that is, so since they have a market that they can charge a lot of money for, and military is another example where it sounds like they have deals with the I think the Army, and so they'll be able to charge them a lot of money too. And so if they can charge certain outlets a very large sum of money, then that means that they can charge normal consumers and developing countries in these different areas
A lot
even
less.
less.
Yeah, that's a good point. And correct me if I'm wrong, but are they planning to roll this out like over the oceans as well, so that you could have internet like this, on boats and cruises and planes and stuff?
They haven't talked about it,
Okay.
but based just on the fact that the military is interested in it, I would assume that the Navy's going to jump on board.
Like that's the eventual goal, at least.
Like, there's no reason. There is a reason initially as they're rolling it out, but once they actually have the full network in place, there's no reason not to do that, because the satellites will still be over that area.
Yeah, that's true. Because I mean, for the time being, as this being rolled out, like right now, say like if you could use it, like obviously it's still using. I always forget the name of it, but the underwater pipelines to go to anywhere that's not in the same continent. But that'll change, and so like I guess at that point they would have to put the satellites either over the ocean, or they would have to have just a couple satellites with higher performance, kind of like the pipeline, temporarily to transmit.
Well, I
to
don't
the
think
other side.
I don't think the satellites are geostationary. And since
Right.
they're not
Yeah.
geostationary, you
They
would
wouldn't
have to
really be able
cover
to. Yeah.
yeah, you'd have to cover everywhere anyway.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. They couldn't just leave them there. Yeah. So I'm guessing, for starters, though, it probably is going to use the underwater pipelines, as it rolls out from beta and
Yeah,
stuff.
as soon as they have, so from my understanding, what the plan is to start with the upper latitudes, which would include the upper U.S. It would include Europe and
Yeah.
Russia and that portion, and then go down from there. Get the Southern California. I mean, better
Yeah.
covered, and then it would eventually cover Southern Asia,
Australia.
northern parts of South America, and then slowly go down from there.
And eventually the goal, I think, is probably to have this at the poles and stuff, too. So you basically just have this anywhere on the planet, right?
They haven't like, even in their example images, they don't cover the poles.
Oh, okay.
That being said, I don't know how the physics works at that area, because like I doubt North and South Pole, its latency would less so be the benefit.
It's just the having internet there that's usable that would be beneficial.
Yeah, having
Yeah.
better internet, and it would still be much better latency even if there was no satellites super close, because the current satellite network is so physically high up,
Right.
that this would make up for that in that way. And so I don't know if maybe their plan is to just like only go so high and so low in the latitude department, and then just beam the network there if it's being used.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I also could see them eventually covering the North Pole sooner than the South Pole, because while there are currently research stations in Antarctica, the North Pole, as the poles melt, is going to become a major shipping hub, and so we'll likely see more infrastructure up there that's actually utilized versus the South Pole, where it's just research.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. I'm gonna be interested to see what comes of that, though. Because yeah, you're right. I was digging around on their site. There's zero official word on anything like that. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. They are ion propelled, though.
I think that's pretty common though for CubeSats.
No,
that
they're the
have
first to do it.
propulsion. Oh,
Yeah, like here it says, like their Starlink satellites are equipped with efficient ion thrusters powered by krypton, and then they're the first krypton-propelled spacecraft ever flown.
well, they're the first ion thrusters
Yeah.
that use krypton then. But
Yes, correct. But anyway, just thought that was funny. But then the other aspect of this, of those speeds, like this is still early, like this is basically alpha stage still.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other important thing for people to remember, is like this is closed private beta. Not a lot of people have access to it. I'm hoping to get into the public beta as soon as possible to bring you guys whatever is allowed under the NDA official information on this. So I'm definitely going to be giving it a try.
Yeah, because like there's no way that this is the max of what the satellites themselves can handle,
Yeah.
unless they're only connected to that first batch of satellites and they aren't connecting to any of the subsequent ones that have been launched.
Right.
Because the actual production Starlink sats can handle 20 gigabits per second.
Right, like between each other as well, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's like you would need a couple hundred people sending data both ways at max at 50 megabits per second to max that out.
Yeah.
Or, quite a large amount of people sending data at normal internet usage to max that out.
Yes.
So there's no way that this is max. Now, one of two things is possible. Either they are, I mean, there's a lot of things possible, but like that I think is likely is that they are probably not operating these at full transmission strength, for one.
Yep.
And then two, due to lack of ground stations, they probably aren't even bothering to operate at full speed.
Yeah, and the one thing I will say is the upload speeds are probably not going to improve a ton. But the download I would expect to improve quite a bit.
It depends. I guess it just depends on what the limiting factor is for those upload speeds. If it is transmission power.
Yeah, which I think it's going to be due to regulation.
But it also could be like they're just prioritizing downlink right now.
Yeah, right.
In how the satellites are operating.
Well, and that's still plenty of upload for normal people.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, so it wouldn't necessarily be what I would want. It's not, but it's
well,
actually.
No, you want 1 billion gigabits per microsecond.
Yes, but the other thing is, like, when you think about that, like, let's say like it's 20 realm of 20 megs a second up, like that's still like half of what you get with the highest end plan you can get from Comcast. That's kind of ridiculous to show you the level of speed limiting that we're having with these other ISPs.
Yeah.
Like the upload speeds are just garbage intentionally, and it sucks. Oh boy. So I think now we will go ahead and jump into our tiny news section.
So we got 4 topics for you in tiny news.
Yeah. So for those that have been waiting this entire time, this is your time. And
if you are actually like that, please comment and explain why you're unique individual.
Yeah. Let us know why you watch the whole podcast for the tiny news. That'd be good. That'd be good to know. I like that. So this first one, I'll let you you put this in here. Go ahead.
I put all of them in there.
Well, yeah.
So the first one is that Tesla is finally bringing 2-factor authentication to the Tesla app. Even Elon admits it was embarrassingly late. It's pretty crazy to have the Tesla app be the keys to your car. And then, for you to not have 2-factor authentication.
Like, are you kidding?
Like, that's pretty bad.
I mean, especially for some, I mean, not that Tesla drivers tend to be normal people, at least not right now, but like for normal people,
it's fairly mainstream of a car in some in some countries. Like there's, in like a couple of European countries, it's like a pretty like a 50% of car sales type car.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so those are the people that, like, their password is password 123, and that's the same password they use for everything.
Well, these are European nations that are also subsidizing electric cars, so they're clearly a little smarter than us.
Even so, I don't trust people creating their own passwords.
Yeah.
But cool.
Yeah, and then
and you said it's SMS based or
SMS or app based, depending on your preference.
Okay,
you have the choice. Yeah, thankfully it's not just SMS based.
Yeah, because SMS based is not good,
especially in the US.
Yes.
And then the next thing, so for those that don't know, there's been a legal battle about how Uber and Lyft and other like contracting services essentially classify the people that work for them.
Yeah.
Because, like, let's be real, Uber and Lyft, for now until automation, need drivers to operate.
Yep.
But they aren't classified as employees so that they don't have to pay them benefits. They don't have to do all this stuff. But it's not like you're contracting out someone to do additional work for a non-permanent position.
Yeah, this is something that you do constantly.
Yeah, this is something you do constantly. This is also like core fundamental to how their business works.
Yes.
Amazon can still ship packages without their drivers, even though they
Yeah.
should still classify them all as employees, but like they do contract out some of that.
Yeah.
But they can still function without that. They just use the post office. Uber and Lyft currently cannot function without drivers.
Yeah, so it's kind of wrong to be calling them a contractor at that point. And then again, the time thing matters a lot too, where it's like, oh yeah, they're a
Mhm.
contractor, but they're a contractor for you constantly, all the time. It's and it's not like they just contract you out for work here and there. Like you work for them, you work all the time, you work a lot of times consistent hours and stuff like that.
Yeah. And so there's been a legal battle in California, and a judge has ordered that they are reclassifying, or they need to be reclassified as employees. And that obviously changes a lot of the calculus for Uber and Lyft as far as their business goes.
Yep.
And it sounds like the solution for Uber and Lyft is that they might just not operate in California for a bit.
And so that's gonna, I think other states are probably gonna end up following, and so they're gonna have to do something about it. And they may have to raise prices to help compensate for that, but like they should.
Yeah, I mean, they're already not particularly profitable.
Well, Uber, I don't think is at all right now.
I think they were before COVID,
Okay.
but COVID tanked their actual driving business, and so they've been using Uber Eats and they're trying to buy Postmates to scale up
They
their
did.
other businesses.
They did
Well,
buy Postmates.
it hasn't been approved by regulators
Oh,
yet.
okay, that's true. That's true. But
Because AT&T tried to buy T-Mobile, it didn't go through.
yeah, that's true.
And so they're trying to find ways to get to the point of profitability in the new world order. But yeah, I mean, this is just going to be a big thing. I mean, it's going to be interesting too, because like Uber has essentially broken laws before to scale up business. And so it's surprising that their solution in this case is to just bow out instead of just breaking laws like they have done before.
Yeah, because they've done that several times where they just say whatever.
Yeah, they were told like you are not allowed to operate in these areas unless you give certain benefits, and they were just like, well, too bad, we're going to operate in this area and we're not going to give the benefits.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy. It's crazy to think a company can do that.
Well, you get big enough, the fines don't matter.
Yeah, that's
you
true.
don't fine people enough.
Yeah. So this next one.
The next thing involves profit as well.
Yeah.
So this is a good thing though. Sony, their Xperia phone business is sounds like about to be profitable
for the first time.
Yeah.
In like ever.
Yeah. They forecasted their first quarterly profits for this upcoming or I guess annual profits through March 2021 for the first time in like years and years. I don't know the last time that they were profitable.
Yeah, I don't know either. It's been a long time. So it's good to see. I've actually always liked Xperia phones, but they've been hard to get a hold of. They don't get carrier deals and that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I really like that they're pushing for 21:9 phones, mostly because I want my phones to match my content, and I want all content to be 21:9.
I agree completely. So it's there's a lot that they're doing right, and I've always liked their hardware. Their hardware's always been really nice. Mm-hmm. So it's good to see that. And then for our final tiny news topic, no use
OnePlus drama.
Yeah, more OnePlus drama. They find no use for the so-called depth camera.
Yeah, so on the OnePlus Nord.
Yes, on the OnePlus Nord. Yes.
So essentially, you can use the depth features of the OnePlus Nord with your finger over the depth sensor, and it functions exactly the same. In other words, they're not using it.
Oh.
They literally put in some hardware, didn't take the time to develop it, and say that it works so that they can advertise it as like a feature.
But then it doesn't. Yeah, that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
I don't know. The OnePlus Nord has been a weird phone. It's been a little bit odd. I mean, I like cheap phones being available again, but there's been some downsides to that phone as well. Like that are like downsides from a company like ethics standpoint too.
Yeah, and apparently the color filter camera on the 8 Pro also is the same thing, where it doesn't actually like it. I shouldn't say it doesn't do anything. It functions the same whether it's covered up by your finger or not.
Yeah.
Which makes me wonder if they could face a class action.
They might. They might for doing that, implementing stuff claiming it does something and it doesn't.
Yeah, it's literal false advertisement.
It's really weird too to just like spend money to put something in that you don't use.
Well, so I think it comes down to it's probably extremely cheap for them to do, because remember, OnePlus doesn't really make most of their own stuff.
Yeah.
OnePlus uses what's the company's name that owns them?
Oh, Oppo?
Yes, Oppo.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they're using like Oppo hardware, both like a lot of times they're using Oppo bodies,
Yeah.
and then they're also using like a bunch of other Oppo equipment. And so it's possible that just at scale, it made more sense for Oppo, the owner of OnePlus, to throw it in there,
Do they
use
they
it as
own
an advertising
OnePlus,
feature.
or are they just contracted to do the
I'm
manufacturing?
pretty sure they own.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. 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 I'm not sure. I thought OnePlus was its own thing, but I could be wrong. So.
Yeah. Either way, they essentially just.
But they do all the work. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe there will be a class action for something like that, but I don't know if there's a good enough, excuse or not. I mean, yeah, it is false advertising to claim that you have a feature that works, but it's kind of a weird situation because it's like here's a thing that does something, and that thing doesn't do it, but the device as a whole still does, right? Like the color filter stuff.
Yeah. So they literally put in the code to make it work with the normal cameras.
Yeah, but it's
rather than the hardware that you're advertising.
Yeah, so I think it could be a little bit of a challenge in terms of the legal case, though, because it's unique, because it's not like you're including hardware and
but
the feature doesn't work,
But the issue is like, so with the depth sensor, for example, you're advertising not just that you have the bokeh effect. If they were just advertising you're getting this bokeh effect,
yeah,
then
right.
they'd be fine. But because you're advertising that this hardware is improving this ability to do this bokeh effect, because we've been able to do bokeh effects from just camera for years and years.
Yeah.
HTC has done that for years,
right?
Or did.
Yeah.
And so it's like you have them advertising that this hardware enhances this thing, and it doesn't.
Right. Yeah, so there could be there might be a suit about that then, because that's kind of crazy to think about. I don't know what their workaround for it's going to be. I don't know what the argument will be.
Yeah, like I wonder if it's even hardware connected, or if it's just physically there.
Yeah. Well,
like
part of me wonders too, like specifically, let's go back to the color filter one that you mentioned. Like, what if the color filter one is like not actually a camera, it's a piece of silicon that they route the same information from the other camera through? Then it kind of is working, right? So I don't know. It's kind of weird.
I guess it depends on exactly how they advertise it, though, because like just because you technically have hardware there, if you're advertising it as a specific thing and it's not that specific thing, then you're still false advertising.
This is true. Yeah.
And if your legal argument's going to be, well, we technically still achieve it, just we still knowingly lied to people, that's not a particularly good.
Not a good argument. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, we're just under the 2-hour mark. I think this wraps things up pretty well. A little bit lighter of a week this week, actually. Usually we're just over the 2-hour mark, but
I mean, we've had some 4-hour weeks.
Yeah, like 3.5-ish. Yeah, kind of crazy, but it's been an interesting week. I think there's a lot of interesting news, and we should have more for you guys, especially come September 1st time frame in the podcast that precedes that. So
yeah. One last thing I wanted to add to the OnePlus thing. Since they're selling these in Europe, which is very pro-consumer and very willing to go after companies, that might be a mistake to be lying about hardware functionality in Europe.
Yeah, that could be a big issue. We'll see how it plays out. It's interesting. My OnePlus is still the nicest Android phone I've ever owned, so I'd hate to see them go bye-bye. But You know, and I mean, obviously, it's not gonna. I don't think it would. I think they're too big. It wouldn't kill them as a company at this point, but it definitely would hurt.
I mean, I feel like the end result's going to be like a little bit of money and them stop lying to consumers.
Yeah, probably. It's interesting.
Like, why would you? I just don't get the logic behind lying to consumers about something with when you're building the functionality anyway.
Yeah, and it almost feels like if they're not using it, they should have turned it on anyway. Like it feels like it shouldn't be that.
Well, if they
hard,
turn it on and they didn't code that, because like it's different work to code that versus different work to code the
right. I'm saying they should have
camera.
just coded it in the first place. I guess is what I'm getting at, though.
Yeah, but maybe the employees that they have just don't know how to do that.
That could be too. Yeah, I don't know. Well, I think that pretty much wraps things up. So thank you everybody for watching WordCast number 79, or watching the clips if that's what you're watching. Although the tiny news usually isn't in the clips, so probably nobody at this point in time didn't watch anything but the full podcast. But anyway, thank you everybody for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, leave a comment, let us know what you think, and we'll see you all in the next one.
Peace.
Peace.